editor Lori Eshler-Freistad, costume designer Sarah Markowitz, and director Leslie Lincoln should be here any moment, so we'll welcome her in as soon as she gets here.
You have a seating assignment?
Anywhere you like. We only have 5 handhelds, so a couple people in the middle can come up there and kind of share a little bit. Oh, except. Sorry. Thank you all for coming. So, Catherine, since we were talking about the infamous log last week, and you happened to see some of that discussion with Mary, I thought maybe we could clear up the history of where that log has been since the end of the show.
Yes. Well, hi everybody. Is this on?
Yep.
Oh, great to see you. The very last night of shooting, the very last scene that we did in those big Van Nuys studios, David said to me, "I think you should keep the log, Catherine." So it, in fact, is not at his house in the archives. I took it to a undisclosed location. I can't really say where, but it does have a humidifier going at all times, and it is very secure. It has dried out a little bit over the years, as have I, and it's doing quite well. I did try and take it to some convention a year or so ago, and I called TSA to see if it was possible to carry it on. And I said I had a carry-on log, and would I be allowed to carry it? And the man said, "The log?" So I said, yes, as a matter of fact, and he said, "No, don't chance it. It could be used as a bludgeon." So I FedExed it. It was one of the most nerve-wracking days of my life. I don't think I'll do it again. So it's back in its location, but I think it's happy. It's close to its roots, so to speak, and in the Pacific Northwest. So.
Well, let's welcome director Leslie Lincoln.
Funny story about the log. I don't know if you remember this, but my friend Red Trash was visiting, and he said, "Oh, there's a log lady," and I went over and she had it, and I picked a little piece of bark off, and you slugged me. She was very protective of the log.
Well, let's talk a little bit about getting involved in the series for the actors. Peggy, Michael, what was the process of getting cast in the show?
Joanna Rayan was really good friends, and basically she gave me a part because I was going to babysit Eric, that he wouldn't get into any trouble. And I don't think that at the beginning of the series they realized that there were that many Native American people in that particular area, you know. So it was kind of pointed out to them, but you know, great role for me. You know, as a native artist and as an actor, you don't get a chance to do art, and that character for me, it did away with some stereotypes and held mirrors up to others, and I'm real proud of it.
For me, I had been married and raised a family, and I got this amazing script, which I had never read anything like. I can't remember if I got the script first or met David first, but when I read the script, it was, I just couldn't believe what I was reading. But my audition process was, I walked into David's office, and there was nothing in his office but a big desk. David and Mark Frost were there, the producer, and there was nothing on the table but a picture of me. And I went, I don't know if this is good or bad. And there was no reading, he just wanted to talk. And so in my mind it was, I knew I already had the part. So in other words, you know, for me, David, it was like he thought all this out. I'm sure he auditioned and there was competition for other actors, but for me, it was like he had thought this out, and so it was mine. And to have that kind of confidence, you know, to work with a great director like David on a show like that was like, it was a dream come true for any actor.
Well, Catherine, you have a long relationship to David, and I'm curious to know how he explained what your character was going to be.
When we were doing Eraserhead, I had a number of jobs on the film, including assisting Fred Elms, who shot it, who's here tonight. And I used to wear a lot of plaid skirts and sweaters, and I also had these glasses that I wore late at night because we shot all night at the American Film Institute in the old kind of gardener's quarters. And he had this idea, I think it was when we were shooting this scene, I don't know if you've seen Eraserhead, but there's this scene where these erasers come down out of Henry's head. And David was very into wood because of his dad was a research botanist for the Forest Service. So he got this idea that he would do a TV series one day, and it would be called I'll Test My Log with Every Branch of Knowledge. And that because I was wearing these skirts and these glasses, that I would be the log girl, and I would get a ponderosa pine log and take it to various experts and ask them about what they did. For example, you take the log to a dentist, and the dentist would put a little blue towel with the little clippy things around it and probe the rings. And then they would talk about dentistry as well as the wood. And it would be a different profession every week. So that was a fun thing to talk about during the 4 years that we were working on Eraserhead. We used to fantasize about the log girl, all kinds of things. And then a few years after that, he called up and said, I get to do this show for ABC, and do you want to be the log girl? And I said, sure. You know, I don't think she's a girl anymore at this point, but we called her the log lady and made up a whole wonderful backstory for the character, and all these people helped make it happen. So it was a really wonderful way to realize a young 20s dream, really. And who knew that 20-some years later we would still be talking about it, which is pretty amazing.
I want to add something about my audition process, because that wasn't the end of it. I took home the script, I worked on the script alone, and then David said, I'm really sorry. He said, I really don't want to do this to you, but we have to audition for ABC. And he said, honestly, he said, I just feel so bad. He was so upset that he had to audition. But it wasn't so much he had to audition. He was very careful and very loving of his actors, and he really didn't want to make his actors audition. And in those days, if you were auditioning for a pilot, you would get on a stage like this in front of a bunch of really miserable executives and do your scene. But the thing that was so delightful is we chose a scene between Everett and myself, Everett who played Ed, and David worked on it with us all day long, one scene. It is as if we were doing Shakespeare, and I'll never forget that, because his first of all, his love for actors and his love for this particular project, and the way he nurtured us. I mean, I think we can all say that. Actors, all of our work on the show, it was all nurtured by David. And of course, after we got the scene, we were amazing. And then after we got the scene, of course, we got, the show. But as far as David went, he said we were already cast. So that was an interesting way of doing it.
So Harley, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the introduction of all these new characters that we see in season 2. Especially in the episodes that we watched tonight. There's a few we finally see Wyndham Earle. In the second season, we get Dick Tremaine and many others. I'm curious to know at what point do you get involved in the lion's share of writing a lot of the show, and where some of these characters came from?
Well, I mean, a lot of that's lost in the mists of time. But I do remember that before the second season, Mark actually called me up and said we want everyone to come in and bring in character ideas. and bring in ideas you have for characters in the second season. And I've been reading this book called The Inman Diaries, which is about a man named Arthur Inman, who was from a very wealthy Atlanta family who had a mental break when he was 22 and never left his room again. And he spent the rest of his life writing these diaries over a course of about 50 years. And he would hire people that he called talkers who would come in and talk to him, and their stories would then become part of those diaries. So I pitched that to Mark, and then that became Smith. So that we did it that way more or less. And so you would kind of come up with characters and put them into play. And Wyndham Earle was something like that too. We always knew that there was going to be a sort of big bad for that season. And Wyndham Earle came out of a lot of different places. He was the actor was a very good friend of Bob Engels. And the name Wyndham Earle came from William Wyndham and Mad Dog Roy Earle, the well, I got to remember because I was in the script first. But you would kind of meet with Mark primarily, and you would talk about various characters and various ideas, but they would usually bring them to you. I mean, after that first kind of initial blush of bringing in ideas for the second season, they would just tell you about different things. And Dick Tremaine, I mean, what can you do? You just kind of follow along and try to keep up the best you can, and move from one episode to the next.
What about some of the characters that we're still about to see the introduction of Annie Blackburn, John Justice Wheeler, a few of the other.
Well, they're complicated histories to all that stuff because there were things that were going to be put into play and then weren't going to be put into play, and so you had to make changes. And one of our big things we were going to do in the second season was there was going to be a romance between Cooper and Audrey, but Kyle didn't want to do that, and so we had a lot of discussions about that. And one of the great things about David is that the relationship that he has with his actors, he'll do anything for them. And I suspect that's why they'll do anything for him. And so this is one of those circumstances where Kyle simply didn't want to do it. He had various reasons for it. And we would say, well, no, you have to do it. He would say, no, I really don't want to. And I remember there was a meeting one day with Mark and David in his office where they were going to have it out and tell Kyle, you've got to do this story. We're going to do this story because that's how we want to proceed in terms of characters in the second season. My office was right next to Mark's office, and there was a very thin wall. And I kind of sat there waiting for the verdict. And then they walked out and said, yeah, we're not doing it. So it was one of those things where then you went, okay, we've got to come up with something different. And Annie Blackburn came out of that. That was the idea about how to bring Annie in and who that character would be. And then you start to kind of weave her into the story as you get into the kind of lodge stuff at the end.
It's funny watching the episodes tonight, the moment where Audrey kisses Cooper in front of David Duchovny is about as far as that gets played out.
Yeah.
So
Well, you can see vestigial pieces of it, even the episodes that I saw tonight. I watched all of them, and you can see bits and pieces of how that might have gone. But it didn't happen, and so we had to kind of improvise and come up with other things. And I think also along the way you came up with, like, for me, James's unfortunate detour to Noir Town. And so that's not one of my favorite things, but we were trying so many things and trying to make these things work, and even, Little Nicky, no one's taking credit for Little Nicky, and yet, but I was watching some of it tonight, and when Tremaine and Harry Goes were sitting there crying and they're kind of getting that play, Uli Adele directed the shit out of that episode, and I went, okay, that's working, I get it now. The second season was crazy like that. There were things that were working so well and were so great. There were other times where things you thought we might be kind of crossing lines that weren't quite working as well. It was always pathos and absurdity. You're trying to find that balance. And sometimes I think the second season we went way into absurdity because why not? And no one else had done it in a way. And so I think that was part of the challenge. And